Okay, it is 11 o'clock, actually 11:01. I am Professor... I'm not sure which one... No, the one straight in front of me? Okay, good. Okay, right, yes. Yay! Hooray, the power of mics. Okay, right, it is now 11:02. I'm Professor Fiona from Royal Holloway, University of London. I have 50 minutes and 68 slides. It's dark and we're wearing sunglasses. Okay. So yeah, you're all here for a talk entitled The Color Out of Space Opera. Color, Style and Symbolism from Forbidden Planet to Battlestar Galactica, and going to a few interesting places in between. Okay, so to start with, what we're going to do is we're going to be, I'm an anthropologist by profession. I also write about science fiction, but this is what it actually says on my doctorate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking at space opera from the point of view of visual anthropology, and more specifically structuralist visual anthropology. Now some of you know what that is, and some of you don't. Don't worry, there will be explanations. We'll be looking at it from three perspectives, nature versus culture. Then we'll go on into how these colors are used to define planets and characters through costume and style. The inevitable warnings. Content warning, I'm going to show the ending of Blake 7, and those of you who think that modern movies are too violent clearly never experienced the 70s. And spoiler warning, pretty much all the spoilers, not just the ending of Blake 7, but I'm going to assume that either people are familiar with what happens in all of the series and films I'm talking about, or if you're not, that you just don't care. And to be honest, I think they're all good enough series and films that you can actually watch them knowing all the spoilers and still be fascinated, captivated, moved, and all sorts of other things. There are no trigger warnings beyond it's going to get bloody towards the end. And of course, there's the inevitable word from your sponsor. All of these are available at the TTA press table. I will be there after the talk if you want them signed. Oh, actually, one slight update. The Blake 7 one sold out yesterday, but the others are all available. And I can also tell you how to get the Blake 7 one and even how to get it signed. So it basically involves emailing me. Okay, so what is structuralism? Well, from an anthropological point of view, structuralism is a movement that developed in the mid-20th century, which was round about when people in a lot of social science disciplines were starting to look at everything effectively from a grammatical point of view. So for those of you who are familiar with language, when you start getting Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and the idea that the language is the words, but underlying the words is the grammar. And anthropologists, looking at the connection between language and culture, made a bit of a leap from there and argued that culture works in a similar way. We behave in certain ways, but underlying that is certain universals and drives and things which start to kind of interface with biology. For instance, one of the things that I'm going to talk a lot about is that human beings have a tendency to think in binaries. Black, white, male, female, dead, alive, This makes a certain amount of sense. We're sort of split down the middle. We've got two of these and two of these and two of these and one of those, but one of the interesting things about structuralism is that, patterns are also, you can identify a pattern to that extent, but beyond that it becomes a bit hard to generalize. Left and right. Left in European cultures, for instance, is sort of associated with evil and sinister, left. But, for instance, in Asian cultures, left is also a bit odd, but it's because it's sacred. And so in the martial arts, you always lead from the left. That's why. It's the god foot. It's the sacred foot. But from that point of view, we can kind of take as a starting point that there are certain things, within our brains that we do tend to more or less respond to, and it does get debated, so we can engage in lively debate after we've talked about this. And the next definition, space opera, what am I talking about here in these terms? Well, again, like things like binary opposition, space opera is also one of these things that can range a bit in terms of its definition. So I'm basically kind of generally and possibly unsatisfactorily going to SF that involves spaceships, epics, journeys. Your archetype here is Forbidden Planet, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But it kind of segues in. I'm going to talk, those of you who were here when I was testing the sound saw, we'll talk briefly about Caprica, which is sort of very much on the fringe of space opera, since the spaceships and robots and so on are a lot more in the background, but there are reasons. Now, color and style are particularly relevant in space opera because the nature of space opera is generally such that you're having to introduce and reintroduce characters, places, and concepts very quickly. And because very few people can get away with having somebody stand up every episode and go, "Hi, I'm the bad guy. Hi, I'm the funny one. Hi," whatever. Space opera tends to rely a lot on visual tropes, which sort of cue you. And the ways in which it cue you we'll talk about as this goes on, and also how and why it's become important to space opera and how it's developed over the years. So, nature and culture, getting back to our binary oppositions here. Okay, so I said I was going to start with Forbidden Planet, and there's a few good reasons. One is that Forbidden Planet is, in some ways, very much the space opera. You could say there were space operas before, but Forbidden Planet really is kind of, Private Eye's got this whole column making fun of people who use the phrase "in the DNA" for stuff that doesn't actually involve biology, but Forbidden Planet really is in the DNA of space opera. Any given space opera, you watch it, visual things, conceptual things, they all, connections to Forbidden Planet come out everywhere. So just to recap, Forbidden Planet was effectively, everybody knows it's doing the Tempest. The captain and his loyal crew land on the Forbidden Planet. They encounter the scientist, Reed Magician, and his lovely daughter, Reed Miranda. And they also discover a monster which is actually to do with the race of aliens that formerly inhabited the planet. And here he is. Now, there's something you should notice about that. Here they all are, they're gray with their lovely, sleek, shiny spaceship. And here's what they're fighting, the id monster. Because it's from the 50s and American popular culture became massively obsessed with Freud. But look at the id monster in comparison to the spaceship. It's red. Well, it's sort of a reddy orange if the colors are right, but it's red. It is chaotic. It is animaline. It rages. It's the id personified, but it's something else. It's nature and culture. And this is something that was also coming out of structuralism around that time. And obsessing anthropologists. This is what Levi-Strauss meant when he wrote The Raw and the Cooked, which didn't have anything to do with the fine young cannibals originally. But yeah, the raw is nature, the cooked is culture. Now, this then got carried on in various ways with, for instance, a famous paper by Sherry Ortner being female to male as nature is to culture. Although her thesis, again, cannot be generalized to everybody, it's interesting that in the West it frequently is, this idea of kind of the organic woman and the synthetic man. And one way or another, this all kind of started creeping into space opera. So you start getting a kind of a technology versus nature tension reflected in color. The silver versus the red. And this carries on, but look what happens in the 1970s. These guys have got the technology. These guys have got the id. Here's another good example from later on, and Joss Whedon actually said this was a very, very deliberate design choice, that these guys should be the kind of raw, rough frontier, and they should be contrasted with the blue, technological, cool, even down to the choice of cameras, the choice of a wobble cam to film the scenes on the Serenity, and a dolly cam, with a very smooth technological push to film all the scenes involving the Federation and the Blue Men and so forth. So what happened? Forbidden Planet, the technology's the good guys. By Star Wars and beyond, the technology is the bad guys. So what we're seeing is still a nature-culture opposition, but we're seeing a shift in how it's being parsed. From the 50s, when technology was going to be our savior, and the id was something that needed to be tamed and suppressed, to the 70s, when there was a big rethinking of all this, and so there was a shift to viewing technology as the thing that is suppressing our wonderful natural id. And where all this is going, I don't know, and it's not space opera, but I do want to, show of hands, who's seen Black Panther? Okay, good, but at least 2/3 of the room there, great, because I want you to think back, or when you see it again, watch this, and notice the colors of T'Challa and Killmonger in the last scene. Because T'Challa's in technological colors, he's in blue, he's in silver, and Killmonger's in gold, red, and orange. So, maybe we're starting to see a shift back to the 50s in a way, and where the good guys have the technology, or then again, it could well be that it's just because of the way the story is structured, where Wakanda kind of represents order and reason, and Killmonger represents a threat to the order and reason, the id of Wakanda, if you like. See what I mean about how Forbidden Planet runs through everything? Anyway, so going on. Now, this is a shift. You've got these very strong color oppositions elsewhere. Battlestar Galactica is carrying on the same thing, but more through earth tones. So we're not getting vibrant id-type reds, but we're getting lovely, wonderful, warm, nurturing beiges and browns versus the blue and the red of the Cylons. So there's still not nature and culture, but expressed kind of in a more stylistic sort of way. And if you look at the way this carries on in the new series, here you've got kind of, again, vibrant oranges, greens, earth tones, but also kind of a sense of a rough and ready technology. It's deliberately retro, 80s, 70s, sort of blocky type things, planes that look like World War II early jets. And this is the Cylons. This is the Cylon base star, and number 6 there is wearing the Cylon equivalent of a flight suit, which is, again, it's black and silver, it's all very techy, there's elements of red, but it is all very sleek and technological. And here's where we get into Caprica, which is interesting because they're doing a bit more of a slightly complex thing with nature and culture. It's not so much a good guy and a bad guy opposition going on there, because the Greystones and the Adamas aren't really kind of good guys versus bad guys, but they are definitely nature and culture. Because this is the Greystones mansion, it's sleek, it's technological, it's wonderful, it's got, an adorable robot butler, when they invent AIs, I want mine looking like him, and then you've got the Adamas. And there you go, red, earth tones, retro look, 40s, represent how they are, this kind of earthy, bloody culture, where you have a mafia and all that. But then on a thematic level, I want you to watch what happens with nature and culture in the title sequence. And again, assuming the tech will work, I really hope so. Whoops, no it won't. Here we are. Culture. Technology. Yeah, here we go. Here's the technology. Something inside the technology. We're in the Adamas, but we're still in culture colors. Notice it's still grays, still blues. And it. Now this, for those of you who haven't seen the series, represents the internet, the kind of VR world that people in Caprica go into. And that's the it. That is the id of society. And the two women you see in there are part of a cult. So you've got this idea represented in the title sequence, which I think is one of the greatest title sequences, bar none, in science fiction, of a very technological, proper, ordered, repressed society with a raging, roiling id that is coming out in this virtual world where people practice strange cults and engage in bloody MMORPGs, and so the use of nature versus culture in that title sequence is really interesting. Getting on to my other case study, you can again see it in both color and stylistic terms in Blake 7. Everybody in Blake 7 is using technology like crazy, but this here is the flight deck of the Liberator, and you notice again, they've gone for a lot of curves, they've gone for a lot of earth tones, golds and grays, and you can't see the Zen computer interface, but it's also kind of browns and golds versus Miss Monochrome and her mutoids here. Again, technology, project down the line in case anybody's wondering. But yeah, you see there, again, there's the culture, it's with the bad guys, nature is with the good guys. And even when you start getting into season 4, when, everything, the good guys lose the nice organic ship and they get one that's a lot more blocky and black and silver and technological looking, still nature follows these guys around. This is Zen on base, and you notice they've got house plants. The brutalist concrete is slightly alleviated by some nice brown paint. You got a board game going on there, everybody's having a nice drink, so you've still got this idea that even if they're kind of being pushed into technology, the world of nature is still following these guys around. And we'll talk also a little more about the shifts here. So now we're going to talk a bit about planets and the way in which lighting is used to evoke a sensation of a different atmosphere. Slight segue away from nature culture, but we're getting back to it. Okay, early example of how this works out. Original series Battlestar Galactica, War of the Gods, where they used basically a color filter to simulate an alien atmosphere. For a long time, a myth existed in fandom that the actors had that wasn't a color filter, and the actors had their faces made up in pale green. And in terms of kind of false memory syndrome, actually, if you ask her on the left there, she will swear blind that she was in makeup getting her face painted pale green, which we know is completely wrong because we actually have the outtakes. And also, one of the problems with that particular film effect, it was the 70s, and so in any sequence on that planet, when they had to use a digital effect, they had to take the filter off, so the planet kind of mysteriously goes back to normal lighting otherwise. But I don't want to diss it, because within its limitations, this is actually a really good, really inexpensive way of basically saying we're on an alien planet. And, and one that looks strange and exotic enough that you're not thinking, no, you're on Devil's Rocks or something. And on the new series, which was actually, in relative terms, much more budget constrained than the original, they also used that trick. This is from the Eye of Jupiter, where, again, you can see it's more subtle, but they're using a lens filter. And so the light looks a lot more harsh, it's a lot more sharp blue, and it really doesn't entirely look natural. And that's before this happens, which is the lens filters plus CGI, at the point at which the mountain erupts and the triple conjunction happens, and presumably somewhere on the planet Jen is sticking a shard into a crystal, and anyway, I'm getting out of space opera here. But yeah, but this is, again, a really cheap way of, and really effective way of saying alien planet, different situation, and also gearing the audience emotionally a bit. Because all that harsh lighting, all that, it's making you a bit tense. It's setting you up for something bad to happen, which of course it does. And again, with the earlier filter, similarly, you've got an emotional cueing. You know, you're going, wow, this is weird, this is groovy, even before Patrick McNee turns up and starts working miracles. So, and no lens filters, but a similar way in which they use lighting to kind of get you feeling different ways about the planets. This is New Caprica. It's a big, awful, depressing place. When we first see it, you know, you hate it. You can practically, smell the coal fires and taste the porridge that you've had for 6 weeks running. You know, it just looks like a depressing place. And then in the flashback episode, Unfinished Business, we see a different side of New Caprica, and we see it on a sunny day. And it's pretty, and everybody's happy, and these two are sharing a joint. They really are, actually. And, so this is a way of saying to the audience, New Caprica, it wasn't all that depressing all the time. We had fun sometimes, there are positive memories. And you're also thinking, because it's an episode based on memory, that maybe, this is rosy. Maybe even then it wasn't so good, but the sunlight of memory is making it a better place than it was. Blake 7 didn't do that so often, but it did in one notable example use lens filters, and that's in Time Squad. You can see there they've got a red filter over the whole thing. In fact, there was an original idea for Callie, her on the left, for those of you not familiar with it, to actually be kind of permanently made up in red, which they didn't do in the end because of time and expense, and Janet Chapel was very much relieved. This is kind of a legacy of that. She was originally going to be a native of the planet, and so, it was going to be filtered red. She was going to have red skin. There was going to be this red theme going. And the makeup left, and she became a native of Auron and who'd traveled in to help the terrorists, but, still the red filter remained. Also, that same season, lighting is used. Cygnus Alpha is permanently in the dark. Again, this is not just saying this is an alien planet and disguising the fact that they're filming in Reigate, but, I don't want to mock, I am not mocking here because, if I say, they're filming it in Reigate, they're filming it in Kamloops, whatever, things have to be filmed somewhere, and frankly, I am just utterly amazed, at the ways in which people can take Reigate or take Kamloops and make it alien. And this is a good example. But it's not just making it alien by having it permanently at night, saying something. Cygnus Alpha is a theocracy in which Brian Blessed rules the planet by keeping everybody else in ignorance and keeping them worshipping a somewhat sinister god. And so you've got the theme going in the lighting, the planet is all in night with a moon, so you've got this idea of kind of concealment, of ignorance, of darkness hiding the light, of lunacy, what I said at the start about how space opera has to evoke these things quickly and efficiently and, to sort of get that little animal thing working in the back of your mind going, this is it. This is one of the ways it does it. Here's another way it happens. Okay, we're back at Forbidden Planet again. And I have a question for you. Which one is the medical officer? Now here, which one's the medical officer? Yeah, okay, going back, one of the, Star Trek is interesting from a Forbidden Planet point of view, in that Star Trek is in some ways Forbidden Planet the series. It came out not all that long after in terms. TV often springs off movies and vice versa sometimes, but often it's that way around. And it really is kind of, the intrepid captain and his mildly diverse crew going out and encountering the unknown in various ways. But one of the problems with Forbidden Planet that Star Trek had to come up against is that their uniforms all look the same. The one guy on there who stands out is the one in the apron, so he's the cook. And culture, our culture being our culture, you've also got a sneaking suspicion he's the comedy character, which of course he is. But yeah, eventually as you watch the film, you figure out who's the medical officer and who's the science officer and learn a bit about their personalities. But if you're doing a TV series, and in particular a TV series which at that point was very minimal continuity, and so you had to assume that some of your audience were just kind of randomly dipping in or that people were joining at any time. You had to have a way of making sure that people could kind of get a bit of an idea of what's going on. Now, speaking from anthropological terms, you encounter this setup completely cold, completely blind. You don't know what those three colors mean. But as you encounter it, you start to figure it out a little bit. I mean, straight away from the picture, you've got a little bit of an idea that maybe gold has something to do with being an officer, because that guy in the chair, he looks like he's in charge, and the other two guys in the gold also look a bit rough. I wouldn't want to encounter those two in a dark alley, would you? Especially not the one with the hair. Anyway. But anyway, everything's also a little bit, you're not so sure, but as you watch it, you start to see that the people in the blue are doing sciencey things and medical things, and the people in the red are doing engineering type things, and getting shot, but that's another story. And so, next time you watch it, if you look in the background and you see an extra going around, you have a bit of an idea of what that extra does, and maybe a little bit of who they are and what they're like, just without them even saying a word, or without anybody saying, this is Lieutenant so-and-so, he's a biologist. Now, in Battlestar Galactica, one of the interesting ways this manifests itself is that they start having a theme right from the start of having the bad guys in white. I would argue this goes into, the origin thing, you see it in the first episode, Saga the Star World, where the Council of 12 are all in white, they're all idiots, except for Baltar on the left there, who's a traitor. So basically, that kind of sets you up a bit for anybody in white is an idiot and a traitor, and this goes on through subsequent episodes. It's also, though, picking up, this is from The Lost Warrior, from other deeper bits of American culture, for instance. It's very explicit here, but if you think about it, who also wears white is the Southern gentleman, the plantation boss, Boss Hogg, So even just these patricians in white, they're already kind of a little cueing the idea in the American consciousness of, the bad guy, the plantation owner in white sitting there. And this, again, we're back in War of the Gods, which is a brilliant story. And this is Patrick McNee. He's the bad guy, as I said. And he is in a white version of Lord Green's uniform. So that's setting him up. This is the anti-Lord Green. This is a charismatic, smart, wonderful person who is also just basically evil. And then they play with it. Because then we encounter the light ship people who are like angels. They heal the dead. When warriors come to their light ship, they magically transform their uniforms into white, and they're all in white. And now we're about halfway through the series, and we know that white means a bad guy. So these guys are being very nice to the crew, but you're also at the same time thinking, are they really all that nice? Why are they reviving people? Why are they taking an interest in the Galactica? And then when they come back in experimenting Terra, there you see, there's John on the left. He is in white, and he has turned Starbuck and Apollo's clothes white. And this is again saying there's something a little bit wrong. John seems to be interfering for the good, and he's encouraging the warriors to interfere for the good, but what are his motives? The warriors may have stopped the planet Terra from blowing itself up, but are they really all that, what have they put in its place? What's going to happen? And the prequel story to this, Greetings from Earth, when they encounter the Terrans, when they see them, they're in suspended animation and they're in white. And they turn out to be good guys, but for about the first hour, you're supposed to be asking yourself that question: are they good? or are they a trap? And then you get to Galactica 1980, which I really don't recommend anybody watching unless you're either a masochist or into bad fiction, with the exception of The Space Croppers and Return of Starbuck, because those two are actually really good. But it's, I suspect, accidental because they were really reusing the lightship costumes for the time travel stories. But I think it's a little interesting that they did, because in some ways that's almost like cueing the audience to say, this is just wrong. And you do. Okay. Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, also plays with this sort of thing a lot. Again, with sort of nature, culture type stuff. Generally speaking, as I said, nature, good guys, culture, bad guys, but this is from The Face of Evil, which is a webisode series by James Benson, for those of you who haven't seen it, and if you haven't, I recommend tracking it down online, because it's really good. But anyway, so you've got these two number 8 Cylons, and straight off, you know, the one on the left is nicknamed Hard 8, the one on the right is nicknamed Sweet 8, and that's kind of how you're supposed to react to them. You know, you're supposed to think that one is not very nice, and the one on the right is nice. She seems sweet, she seems friendly, she's apparently the ex-lover of Gata there on the crutches. And then as the story goes, you start to get that impression flipped, that maybe Sweet 8 is not so sweet, and maybe Hard 8, you know, well, she's hard, but maybe she's a bit more benign than we might have thought. And yeah, this is just for the nature colors thing. There's also an immediate practical purpose, although New Galactica is more of a continuity series, so, you know, they're not so worried about people being able to pick up straight away. They still need ways of getting casual viewers, new viewers, and so on, to distinguish the characters, which is particularly important when many of your characters look exactly like each other. These are two Dorals, known as Burgundy Doral and Teal Doral for obvious reasons. But, you know, this is the thing, you know, how are you, they needed to come up with fairly easy, inventive ways of making sure that you don't get confused as to which Doral is which in any given scene, and so, you know, the fact that they wear different clothing helps. But you can also use the clothes to show a character's journey. This is Leoben, he's also a Cylon, and when we first see him, this is how he looks. He's very, you know, very rough-edged, very, you know, he's a man looking for something, you know, he thinks he finds it in Starbuck. And then gradually, as his journey progresses, and he kind of becomes calmer, and in some ways becomes a bit of a touchstone figure for Starbuck, and whilst at the same time having his own illusions about who Starbuck may be shattered, he starts to wear darker clothes, and he starts to look less rough, you know, smoother, as to kind of show that he is approaching closure. It's a bit of a sad closure, but it's a closure nonetheless. And if Baltar's journey, meanwhile, is interestingly flagged up by the changes in costumes of Head 6, the 6 who keeps appearing to him, and we don't know who and what she is or why only he can see her. But yeah, when you first see her, she's in red. Cylon red, this is what you get on the posters. So there you go, there she is, she's red, she's obviously heavily associated with the Cylons, also though with id and all these kind of roiling emotions. And it's so associated, the red dress is so associated with Cylons that when Ellen Tigh turns up and we first see her in her red dress, yeah, we start to get the feeling that maybe there's something a little bit interesting about Ellen too. This is actually from the plan, but you know, she's in the same red dress, and you know, by the plan, you know, it becomes very obvious why she's wearing the red dress. But Head 6 also changes her clothes as Baltar's journey progresses. This is her from around the Pegasus arc, when again things are going very badly for everybody, including Baltar. Baltar is kind of having to deal with you know, some very sinister things with regard to Kane and her treatment of Gina, the 6 who was her lover. And so Head 6 first starts wearing black, and then she disappears entirely. But as things start to get better for Baltar, as he becomes the head of a cult and starts kind of finding his way in the fleet, you know, using his intelligence more for good, then she starts turning up in brighter colors, blues. And finally, white. Now, there's two really major times when Head 6 wears white. One is towards the end of the series, as Baltar's cult starts to take hold, but also in this episode, Cobal's Last Gleaming, which is the final episode of season 1, and this is when he has the vision, where Head 6 takes him to the opera house, and for the first time he sees the baby, which is spiritually his baby, and his baby and her baby. It's the union of human and Cylon. So this is a very spiritual moment, and she's dressed in white. So it's spiritual, it's also in some sense a wedding, in that it's kind of saying, you know, kind of it's you, it's me, and this is the baby. But remember, and New Battlestar Galactica is never too far away from its source program, but remember white, it means bad guy. So it's also saying maybe we shouldn't be trusting Head 6, maybe what she's telling him about it's you, it's me, it's the baby is not really how it's going to pan out in the future. Okay, now we'll do a little brief segue. Common thing in common costumes in space opera is to represent the future by drawing on the past. As people find that people dressed in what people's idea of future clothes are is a little alienating, so one way to kind of get the sense of strangeness while still seeming other is to kind of draw on the past. Now, Battlestar Galactica here is doing it wrong. Why is it doing it wrong? Because these guys are space cowboys and they're in their space cantina in their space hats. And it looks stupid. I'm sorry, it looks stupid. I love Battlestar Galactica, but this is not their finest hour. This is how to do it right. And if you look at this, it is also space cowboys. Look at him, space gunslinger, with his space gun, sitting in his space cantina, being confronted by his space bounty hunter, and even the colors, they're almost exactly the same. But he's not wearing a shiny silver hat. And that's how to do the drawing from the past right, and how Battlestar Galactica does when it's doing things like Roman-inspired costumes and Egyptian-inspired helmets and things like that. You know, it's not stealing it directly, it's saying, you know, kind of, let's be more subtle. Which isn't to say George Lucas always gets it right either. And this isn't necessarily wrong even for the reasons you might think. It's wrong because the historical associations are wrong. Now, the Phantom Menace is basically Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress. Seriously, it is, you know. Everybody says that for The New Hope, but Phantom Menace is basically that. And so, you know, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to evoke this Tokugawa era, you know, noble woman. But the problem is the associations are wrong. You know, if what you're trying to do is say, you know, Padme Amidala is a caged and cosseted figurehead who does not really govern, but who is effectively at the mercy of the people around her, who is, you know, sheltered, who is possibly, you know, she's got the small painted stripe on the lip, which actually is the makeup of an apprentice geisha. So, you know, that is maybe also saying that she is for sale, and she is none of these things. There is a very Padme Amidala-like princess in The Hidden Fortress, but she doesn't dress like that in the slightest. She dresses in the Tokugawa era equivalent of tomboy clothes, you know, and she dresses like a peasant for half the movie. So, you know, she, if, you know, they'd actually followed the ethos a lot more, then Amidala would have been turning up, you know, in as little ceremonial robe as possible. So it is possible to do drawing from history and get it wrong. Now we're into Blake 7, and the thing that they did right from the start really was to kind of set up their cast quickly for rapid role identification through color coding. See here I'm pretty sure this is Seek, Locate, Destroy, or possibly it's both Seek, Locate, Destroy and Anyway, so you've got the colours going on here, and again, remember, Blake 7, at least the start draws heavily on Robin Hood. So, yeah. And you look at these colours, and so you've got Robin Hood there in the middle, and little John there in the brown, and Will Scarlet, gender flipped in the scarlet. But you look at these colours also, and it, with the associations in Western culture, if I were to say to you, which one's the telepath, it wouldn't take you too long to find her. There she is in the light green. Nature, vibrancy. If I was to say to you, who's the sexually repressed, amoral computer technician, yeah, that's him in the blue. If I was to say to you, who's the peasant, there he is in the brown. Who's the scarlet woman, she's in the red, And this works even to when they're not wearing those cagoules. Which one is the sexually repressed computer technician? Which one's the peasant? Which one's the scarlet woman? Which one's Robin Hood? You can see it straight away, can't you? Even though they're not wearing the cagoules, there's still the color coding element taken to a particular extreme, and for very good reasons, in the wonderful Tanith Lee episode Sarcophagus, in which the crew are possessed by alien entities, which are color-coded, and which again are drawn to the attributes. So, kind of the fool archetype is drawn to Villa there in the orange, the warrior to Tarrant in the red, the musician to Dana in the blue, and there's Avon in the black who's going to kill everybody. Now, June Hudson in season 2 was not a big fan of color coding. So she went away from that. But again, if you look at it, you can see she's doing the same sort of thing, just using style. Who's the sexually repressed computer technician? That's him in the leather. She's tremendously kinky. Look at June Hudson's opus. It's just, yeah. Who's the peasant? Well, that would be the man in the peasant shirt back there. Who's the scarlet woman? That's her dressed as Lauren Bacall. That's the fool in the motley. Look, he's wearing motley. There's Robin Hood still in his green shirt, and Callie in her flowing robes is the mystic. So you can do it through style. Now again, when we first meet Dana, she's set up straight away as the kind of huntress archetype. She's good with all weapons. So she appears first in a Greek chiton. And then when she settles down to more normal costume for the era, you've still got this kind of flowing chiton-like element. You're still basically seeing kind of Huntress Diana there. And she also wears bright colors because she's young, she's impetuous. Tarrant, interestingly, actually, I don't have a slide for Tarrant here, but Tarrant, interestingly, you notice for his first season, he kind of has a very variable style. He changes his style quite a lot. Which is interesting because Tarrant was initially conceived of as being a traitor, a Federation captain who infiltrates the crew on the pretense of being a deserter, and then at the end of the season he was going to sell them out. But they decided not to go there in the end. But it's interesting that the legacy of the treachery kind of lingers in the costume. Now again, talking about journeys, here she is. And again, the conscious decision was taken to put her in white straight away, even, specifically because she's the bad guy. And now, the UK not having Boss Hogg and the plantations, this was kind of a deliberate sort of undercutting, a kind of a, she's bad and all the bad guys are in their black uniforms, but the one who's leading them is in her white. Then she changes color for Gambit, and this is where, this is the Space Weimar episode. And she's not there officially, she's not there in role, but she is basically, so she is, for the first time and the only time, she is in Scarlet, She is in Weimar, Berlin, and she has just changed her color completely. And after Children of Auron, in which she has her psychic miscarriage, as it were, from Children of Auron onwards, she wears more or less mostly black. There are one or two kind of telling episodes where she has a little bit of white on her clothes, but Jacqueline Pierce herself said, the character was in mourning, whatever happened to her from there on, there was always this little element of mourning to her. So, in a way, it's not a bad bad guy black. It's a bad guy black, but with a tragic edge. You know, she's a bit of a tragic villain as well at this point. Now, when we get to season 4, this is when things start to get a little interesting, costume-wise. Now, you'll notice we're not color coding. We're not even style coding here. But what we are doing is, notice these guys are all in sort of gray patterns, and then right front and center, who's in black and white. Now, season 4 is very much characterized by Blake 7 kind of becoming the Avon-centric universe. Everybody else fades into the background. Their stories become, you know, ancillary to Avon's story. So, similarly, with their costumes, they all become more nondescript. They all become kind of subordinate to Avon, whose costumes just get blacker and whiter and more prominent. And now, to bring it full circle, nature culture. We're going to start going into nature culture again. Okay, yeah, people are dying, people are starting to get shot. Yeah, here's the proof, yeah. Okay, now there she is. She's in browns, she's in beiges. She's killed by nanotechnology colors. Here's Blake. Blake is in nature colors. He's in brown, he's in white, he's in stained. Now Arlen behind him has been in nature colors up to this point, but now that she reveals the traitor, she changes to black and white. And here's where it happens. Avon, representing technology, representing culture.
Have you betrayed us? Have you betrayed me? Talent doesn't understand. Neither do I. I set all this up.
Notice the red, notice the sirens. The it's never far behind. Bang, culture kills nature. Last words, I've always trusted you. Emotion.
Hey! They have us! They stop!
He happened. Be so kind as to drop your guns. All of you. You and this nest of rebels are now prisoners of the Federation. Your friend Blake said he couldn't tell anyone who was Federation and who wasn't. He was right. He couldn't.
You're a Federation agent.
I'm a Federation officer.
Oh, now look, I'm moving against the Federation. You're right. I'm not even armed, you can't kill me. I'm completely harmless and harmless.
Here they come. The noise stops. And he smiles. So, you knew Blake 7 was brilliant before. Now there's another reason why it's brilliant. Because the ending, culture triumphs over nature, nature can't win, it's the destruction of the natural. So yeah, downbeat mood, but yeah, so I think, sort of putting these concluding thoughts up about how, we should look for associations and how they're used by people, producing, costuming, directing, and writing space operas, and how this can show us why some ideas work and some ideas don't, whoever's doing them. And now we've got a few minutes, so I think I can take a few questions. Though, yeah, I'd also briefly like to say thanks to Tony Keane for the title. Thanks to my wonderful co-author, Alan Stevens, for his usual invaluable assistance, and also for getting the Blake 7 screen grabs, because I'm terrible at that. And the other Blake 7 costume screen grabs I got from this site, which if you're doing Blake 7 cosplay has got to be an invaluable resource. And here's the internet bump. You can photograph and take it down if you want more stuff. Okay, and I will take any questions. Yes, in the red. Here comes the technology.
Surely the problem with the way Amidala was dressed is because at that point she's representing very much order and control and being buttoned down, and yet she's dressed in red rather than more ordered colours.
That is part of it, though, and that's a very good point. I think there's quite a lot wrong with that costume. The characterization, you're right, the red as well, though again, possibly there's something going on there, because again, this is, he's drawing on Kurosawa a lot there, and in Japanese culture symbolism, red is a happy color. So again, possibly what we're getting is a misfire, that what he's trying to do is to indicate that all seems to be right on Naboo at the moment, and it's all going to go totally belly up. But the thing is, because red with us is associated with danger and id and fire and all sorts of somewhat less positive things, it's not reading properly, but thank you, that's right. Next question. In the fox ears? It is a fox, right? Or yeah, good.
These colour associations you picked up, how far back in culture do you think they go? Or just since like the 50s and 60s when they come about?
Well, that's a pretty interesting question. The practice of kind of guiding people through colour pretty much goes back as far as there is theatre, or even just mumming. If you look at kind of like the reason why I think the Robin Hood thing it works so well as a touchstone for the drawn in the early Blake 7 is because Robin Hood. I mean, the plays go back to the Middle Ages. And you would have had to make it very easy and very obvious for audiences which one's Robin, which one's Marion, which one's the front, particularly since they're all being played by cis men, So you've got to make sure that the groundlings that's standing at the back of the tavern, can see. So quite probably this is going back quite a long way. I haven't really, one area where I'd like to go with this actually is to kind of sit down with some of the, the pulp B-movie, reels, the Buck Rogerses and the Flash Gordons, and see if there's anything like that going on there, stylistically. But that's another paper, I think. Okay, I thought I saw a hand up at the back.
You answered the first question,
Yeah.
and then my subsidiary question about the Flash Gordon and everything else you touched upon, so I'm trying to think of something else.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, in the purple jacket? Yeah.
Thank you.
you. Really interesting talk, Fiona. As I was watching it, and obviously I'm just kind of fangirling away about all the Blake 7 stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we were at the same BFI talk with June Hudson.
Yes.
Which was amazing when she was talking about how she started the characters. But watching this, I was actually thinking about Who and the colouring there.
Yeah.
You've got TARDIS blue, and some of the companions, and sort of the styling there. So you didn't cover it here, but is there some read across to that too?
I think there is actually. I mean, it depends really on who's producing it a lot. I mean, you know, in some ways, kind of the really problematic thing of the Nathan Turner era was that he kind of really went in for kind of, he wanted to do kind of archetypal, immediately recognizable costumes, and this was a problem because after you watch it for a little while, you start to wonder whether Tegan and Adric stink to high heaven because they haven't changed their clothes in weeks. But it, you know, more subtly done, though they do develop these themes. I mean, I love the way Peter Capaldi's costume, for instance, has been changing as his character changes. And again, with Tom Baker, you sort of watch the way, and so June Hudson's costume for Tom, I thought was absolutely great because it sort of shows how the character, it foreshadows his regeneration, you know, kind of he's become sort of more mannered, more stylistic, and yet also red, you know, it's kind of saying something's going to happen soon. So, you know, I think that, you know, is, one of the things that can, yeah, oh dear, I'm going to have to cover it, but yeah, we can talk about Doctor Who at the bar, yes. Okay, but thank you all very much, you've been a great audience.